Hi, I'm George Ellis, and today I'm going to show you the bottleneck constraint, the single constraint that's going to let you improve project and initiative performance dramatically and quickly. The bottleneck is the constraint that, when relaxed, maximizes throughput. Goldrat's brilliant observation in the 1980s was that every project, initiative, or task has one bottleneck. Think of a creek that floods a farmer's field. There are many places that farmer could dig to make some sort of improvement in the flow. But there's only one bottleneck, that place where digging out will maximize the flow of water. This illustrates that there are always lots of good things to do, but only one will make a large difference. Work on anything but the bottleneck and you'll see little benefit. Managing the bottleneck focuses the team on what matters most. Goldrat's concept of the bottleneck can change how you look at project management. But let's start with something simpler. Say you want to drive to an appointment at noon. It sounds simple, but there are actually many constraints you could measure. Traffic level, mechanical issues, arrival time, having an accident, a ticket, fuel, miles to go. You could set up a measurement system to track all 7 of these. Of course, that's ridiculously complicated for driving, but as we'll see, many people do something similar in project management. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's simplify these constraints by organizing them into 3 groups. Our bottleneck is time. We'll consider ourselves successful primarily if we arrive to the appointment on time. But we also have constraints that we'll call non-negotiables, things like traffic tickets or having an accident or a roadside breakdown. It's not possible to consider a trip successful if these things happen, so we're going to drive with care and we're going to take care of the car. Still, these aren't the sorts of things we measure continuously during the trip. Finally, there are what we'll call subordinate constraints, things that can be managed through the bottleneck using Goldrat's concept of reflection. Reflection is the ability to restate a constraint in the units of the bottleneck. Now, we do this all the time when we drive, and we do it naturally. If we know the distance is 30 miles and we think the average speed is about 30 miles an hour, we can restate the mileage constraint of 30 miles as a time constraint of 1 hour. If we're low on fuel, we might need to add 10 minutes to the time to allow us to stop and refuel. So low fuel is reflected as time. And if we know lunchtime traffic can be heavy, we can reflect the traffic level into adding time, say adding 10 minutes to the schedule. So the entire time we're driving, we're keeping an eye on time. We're not managing through a 7-column chart of each of those constraints. So what's this got to do with project management? Well, think of our project like the drive. Of course, the constraints are different. Instead of watching the clock, we'll have a schedule that we need to perform to. We'll have to produce good quality work. We'll need to comply with company and government regulations. We'll have a budget that we need to stay within. We'll need to satisfy our customers. We'll need to create a financial return. And we'll need to treat the project team well so that they remain engaged through the project. But we can sort these constraints just like we did for driving. Goldrat taught us that in projects, schedule is usually the bottleneck. There are non-negotiables. If you fail to comply with the rules, your days as a project manager will be limited. Same thing if you mistreat the project team and you wind up with serious disengagement problems. And there are 4 subordinate constraints: financial return, customer satisfaction, quality, and budget. Remember, the bottleneck is not necessarily the most important thing. We could easily argue that in the long term, financial return is more important. But schedule is the bottleneck because driving schedule creates the right behaviors. Now let's take a look at how these subordinate constraints can be reflected in the bottleneck. Here are 4 examples of reflection for projects. What if we discover partway through our project that we can add a feature to our website that will create $300,000 of additional revenue every year, but that feature will add 6 weeks to the schedule? The bottleneck constraint is the 6 weeks, and we can compare whether straining the bottleneck constraint is worth the $300,000. What if a customer trial fails? We may need to revise the product, and that might add 4 weeks to the project. Now, there's nothing in thinking about the bottleneck constraint that simplifies the world to just, if we get done on time, it's fine. If the customer trial fails, we need to step back and correct the product. It's just that the bottleneck constraint allows us to restate the effect of the failure in time. And what if we find a defect in our website? That might add 2 weeks to the schedule. Again, we don't think about not going back and addressing quality issues. It's just wanting to reflect them in the bottleneck. And finally, what if when we get behind, we identify a consultant who could pitch in and help pull the schedule back in 6 weeks? When we go to our company leaders, we're able to state the effect of the consultant as 6 weeks on the bottleneck against a cost of $75,000. And that should make it a lot easier to make a decision on whether we hire the consultant. So, does managing the bottleneck really work? Absolutely. Compared to trying to measure 6 or 8 parameters all at once, giving confusing signals, the bottleneck changes behavior by focusing the team on what they can affect most. And reflection gives us a way to evaluate decisions in common units, yielding faster, better decisions from our leadership and allowing us also to even craft the request for a decision better and in more meaningful ways. Goldratt's fever chart is a great example. It's a powerful technique founded on schedule as a bottleneck for complex projects. You can see more about the fever chart in Chapter 20 of Improve. I hope you found this video useful. If you'd like to see more about the bottleneck constraint and many other topics in lean thinking for knowledge work, please see Improve, the next generation of continuous improvement for knowledge work.